Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing a really fascinating guest for you today, involved in creating a better and safer tomorrow for all of us. Some really unique technologies we'll be discussing today that we don't normally go into, but which are really cool. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Thomas Karr. He's the former Assistant Director of Directed Energy in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, Research and Engineering, where his responsibilities covered all directed energy research and development in the Department of Defense. And Dr. Karr has over 4 decades of experience in the application of science to national security. Prior to joining the Office of the Undersecretary, he was a DARPA program manager for 6 years there, focused on creating new programs for both kinetic and non-kinetic effects, communication, information processing, and exploitation, as well as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Prior to that, Dr. Karr was director of Electro-Optical and Infra-Red technologies at Raytheon Space and Airborne Systems, as well as Northrop Grumman, and was a group leader and program leader and senior scientist at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory before that for 12 years. And along the way, he was involved in co-founding a commercial space company and has consulted for many companies in the national security industry domain. Dr. Karr earned his bachelor's in physics from Princeton, his Ph.D. in elementary particle physics from University of Maryland, and was a Joliot-Curie Fellow in Atomic Energy Commission of France. He's published dozens of scientific papers and serves on the organizing committees of 3 scientific conferences, holds numerous patents, and he's also a fellow of the Military Sensing Symposia, the Society of Photo-Optical Instrumentation Engineers, and the Optical Society of America. A lot of really interesting themes to get into today. We're honored to have him. Dr. Thomas Karr, welcome to our show.
Thank you for that generous introduction. I'm humbled when you go through that list of stuff that I've done. I got to meet this guy you're talking about.
As I believe you mentioned in your introduction, I do hold this title of Special Government Employee for a couple of parts of the Department of Defense. That's an unpaid position. I want to be clear that everything I'm going to say in this podcast is my personal opinion. Nothing should be taken as the official position of what I say should not be taken as the official position of the Department of Defense or the U.S. government or of any other organization. It's just my opinion. I don't want to misrepresent. I'm here as a private citizen, just speaking my own opinions based on my experience.
We've been chatting for a little while, Thomas, and I'm glad we finally got the opportunity to do this. Would love to start off, as we typically do, by handing you the floor for a little bit to talk a little bit more about yourself in the early days. You know, I typically look at our guest Ph.D., in your case back in 1976, entitled Field Theory of Extended Particles Based on Covariant Harmonic Oscillator Wave Functions, which, amazingly as the topic is, I found it equally amazing that in between the Lagrangian functions and quark models and tensors and scalar mesons, that you mix in the Tao Te Ching and Lao Tzu and his discussions about understanding the primeval beginnings of the universe. Thomas, take us back to the early days. Take us back to 1976, if you would.
So you found a copy of that thesis somehow through the internet. Okay, amazing. You're probably the second person in the world who's actually read that thesis. So. Uh, I, even as a little kid, I was always fascinated with science, with all of science. And I grew up in Chicago, and I used to go to the Chicago Public Library on the weekends. Back then, this was in the 1950s. You would never do this today, but my parents would let me, as an 8 or 9-year-old kid, on my own, ride the bus and ride the subway down to downtown Chicago to the Chicago Public Library, which was an excellent public library. And I read way ahead of my biological age, so I talked the librarians into letting me go to the adult section of the library, say kids section, adult section. And I used to roam through the stacks, and if I found an interesting book on science, I'd bring it home. They'd let me check it out. So I was always fascinated with. I knew I wanted to be either a scientist or an astronaut when I was a little kid. In high school, I had a fantastic physics teacher in high school. Dennis Hepner is his name. In taking that, that's when I really decided physics was what I wanted to study as a scientist. Before that, I had sampled, biology, chemistry, geology, other things, but Mr. Hepner was such a terrific teacher and so inspired me that I decided, okay, I'm gonna major in physics. Went to Princeton University for 4 years, got my degree, my bachelor's degree there. And I went on to get a PhD. At that time, I was thinking, well, the path I'm going to be on is for academic research. I'm going to become a professor someplace. The University of Maryland, I met some absolutely terrific professors, also at Princeton. I mean, I think I'm a smart guy, but I met some real geniuses when I was a student who are way above me. It is a humbling experience to try to talk, for me to try to talk physics with someone who I would truly consider a genius at it. People who I can't think as fast as they can talk. Okay? I can't absorb it. So I had some great teachers, some very inspiring teachers. And after 76, when I got my PhD from the University of Maryland, I applied and got a postdoc. I had that postdoc in Paris that you mentioned, the Joliot-Curie Fellowship. So I got to live in Paris at the university for a year. Then I came back to the US. I was at the University of Miami for a while. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to get off the academic track, not because I didn't enjoy doing the pure science, but shall we say, the sociology and the politics of the academic world. When you get into it, did not appeal to me. There's a joke saying that people use about academia that the political infighting is so vicious because the rewards are so meager. And the rewards are meager, and the infighting was vicious, and there are in-groups and there are fads. And if you're following the fad and you're with the in-group, you can maybe get ahead. But if you want to pursue something that's not the current fad, it's harder. It's harder for you. And I always was drawn to difficult problems that weren't part of the fad, and that would take where there wouldn't be quick success. You might think about something for many, many years before you make any progress on it. So I decided to get out of the academic track and get into the track of applied science, applied physics. And remember, I said I wanted to be either a scientist or an astronaut. So I decided, well, I'm not going to be an academic scientist. Let's get into the space program somehow. So that's how I got into the work on Lockheed Research Lab in Palo Alto, and work on intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and sensors. I did a lot of work on sensors from the ground looking up to space, from space looking down for remote sensing, airborne, air to air, and so on. And I did apply to be an astronaut with NASA several times. They didn't take me.
What are you gonna do?
Partly because I was honest about, because they ask you, even on the first application, you have to provide a medical history. And I honestly said, yes, I used to suffer from what are called cluster headaches. They're like migraine headaches. They come may come, maybe come every day or every other day at the same time. I don't have them anymore. They stopped, but as soon as they saw that on the application, rejected. Okay, so I applied the next year, rejected. I applied the year after that, rejected. So I decided, okay, I get the message, and I understand that if you have a headache like that, when you get a headache like that, it's really debilitating. I'm glad I don't get them anymore. So I can see why they don't want somebody, up in the International Space Station to somehow, come down with that where there's nothing they can do for that person to help. So anyway, that launched me on a career in applied science. I spent 12 years at Lawrence Livermore National Lab where I worked on, and I should say the first 10, 11 years of this applied science career was on directed energy, and particularly on the sensing side of directed energy.
Right.
Not making the big laser or making the big particle beam gun, but finding a target and tracking a target and knowing when you're hitting the target and so on. And I did that for 5 years at the Lockheed Research Lab, and then for another 5 or 6 years at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Until I switched to another division and did more satellite-oriented, space-oriented things. And ended up, my last few years, I was a program leader on a number of projects to do with reconnaissance and with non-lethal weapons. After that, because I was always interested in sensing from space, I was a co-founder of this commercial space company called RDL Space Corporation.
Yep.
We didn't make any money. It went out of business after a few years because it couldn't get a license from the government to, what we wanted to do was to have radar satellites that would look down on the Earth and make radar images. At the time, there were several companies with visible light cameras, electro-optic sensors that made visual optical images. And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be, since they're giving licenses to make optical images, maybe they'll give us a license that we could sell commercially radar imagery. The radar imagery you can get day or night. You can look through clouds. You have a lot more opportunities to collect that kind of imagery. But the government didn't want to have, the US government didn't want to have a commercial company with that kind of technology, or at least with very good technology. So they wouldn't give us the license that we wanted, and we eventually went out of business. It's too bad, because since that, now this was in the late 1990s. Now, 20 years later, there are many companies all around the world that are collecting this kind of radar imagery and selling it commercially. There are, most of those radar satellites are owned by companies that are overseas, that are not American companies, which means the American government has no way to restrict who they sell the imagery to or where they collect it. And we warned them of this and said, you give us a license, you'll have so-called shutter control. You can tell us, don't look at a particular place, particular time. We have to respect that as part of the license. But anyway, that was an interesting experience. At my attempt at Silicon Valley entrepreneurship. We were very bold. We were 20 years ahead of all these guys that are out there now. Since that time, as you mentioned, I worked at Northrop Grumman Electronics and worked at Raytheon as a director of some of their technology. I had a tremendous amount of fun working 6 years as a DARPA program manager. DARPA is a unique place to be, like nothing else in the world, really. And I would say being a DARPA program manager is sort of like being an entrepreneurial CEO, in that you create your own program and you run it. You're the boss. You have angel investors. It's called the director of DARPA, who gives you the money. And there's a board of directors that about once or twice a year, looks in on how you're doing and seeing if you're keeping up with what your progress is and what your problems are. And the rest of the time, they leave you alone. And I hired my own team. I picked the contractors, I supervised the contractors. I set their goals. It was like, so every program I started was like starting a new company. I could say that I started 5 big companies and about 20 little ones. Okay. In 6 years, it was great fun to do. And there's really no other place in the government, anywhere in the world, as far as I know, you can do that. At that point, I decided to retire from full-time employment. It was time, and I'll retire from DARPA rather, and have to leave. One of the great things that makes DARPA so innovative is that everybody that manages money is temporary.
Yep.
There are people who are career employees there, but they're in, the human resources or the security department or the internet infrastructure department. They keep the place going, but everybody that manages money, all the program managers and the office directors and even the director of DARPA is temporary. And has on your badge, there's what you call the sell by date. Okay, just like on a milk carton, sell it by such and such. Well, on your ID badge at DARPA, there's a date by which point your job there is gone and will expire. And it's there, and the dates are on the badge. Everybody can see it. So every day when you come to work, you know that the clock is ticking. And so it motivates everybody to try to get something done, try to accomplish something. You can't just be a log roller. And you look at the calendar, another day went by. What did I accomplish? How much closer did I get to my goal? So that pressure, I think, is very, very good and motivating people. Plus, you flush out people every 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and you get new people in with new ideas and new energy, and it keeps the place vital and vibrant. So I love that 6 years there. After the 6 years, definitely it was time to leave. 6 years is a long tenure there. And the average is probably 3 or 4. And I'm very grateful that I was allowed to continue a couple more years to start a few more programs. But then I went on to Office of Secretary of Defense. They were just standing up a new organization there called the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering. The first Undersecretary was Michael Griffin, who had himself a very distinguished career. He had been the administrator of NASA and had many other prominent positions in the science and technology world. And part of setting up that organization is he was given a list, which originally I think was 9 technical areas, has since grown to 11 or 12, that had to was of special interest to accelerate them and get them into provide some military capability. And so he was looking for these people to be what came to be called principal directors of each of these areas. He asked me to be the principal director for directed energy. Now, if you mentioned, I said the first 10 or 11 years of my career, I did directed energy, but after that, it was all satellites and intelligence and reconnaissance and surveillance and some non-lethal stuff. And so why do you want me to be director for directed energy? Well, one of the most difficult, technically challenging things about putting directed energy into a military system is all that other sensing stuff. You've got to find a target. You've got to ID the target. You got to track the target. You have to understand where's the vulnerable spot on the target, and then put the laser beam or the particle beam or whatever it is on the vulnerable spot. So all those other technologies are absolutely critical, and in some sense they take up the bulk of the effort and the money and the integration problems of putting something like that in the field. So I was a good fit for that, and I did that for 2 years in the Pentagon. I have to say the Pentagon is one of the dreariest work environments I ever worked in terms of having to go to the office every day. It was like going back, 30 years or something in my career. But I worked with some great people. I got to collect my own team, support team around me, and start up new projects that I think accelerated the DoD's activity in that area.
Yep.
And then finally, in 2020, I decided it's time to stop full-time work, and now I just work as a part-timer. I help out Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and also the Air Force. But it's a part-time activity for me.
Mm-hmm. No, it's I really enjoyed that, and especially when you talk, because I know I've had many of the DARPA and the other ARPAs that have been stood up since then, and yeah, I think if I was a project manager at one of those places, I wouldn't want to leave after. But
yeah, you have to tell people you got to leave. It's time to leave.
Yeah, kick you out. But
because it's so much fun. It's really
right.
So much fun.
It sounds like a lot of fun. But yeah, no, it's that was enjoyable. So let's talk about some of these topics that you brought up. I mean, they're all extremely interesting. Probably do a show on each of them. I'd like to go back because you mentioned, is it you started, in the early 1980s, working and publishing on lasers per your time at Lawrence Livermore. And again, for everybody listening and watching, we'll put Dr. Karr's bio, of the show, but also connect to his Google Scholar. But you have an incredible array of papers on atmospheric heating and passive infrared bullet detection and tracking. You sort of the entire ecosystem, as you were just talking about, of this stuff. It's not just about shooting a laser beam over here, right? There's a lot that goes on there. And I thought it was really interesting in the middle of all of that, and this was 1990 now, you published a paper entitled Plan for a Laser Weapon Verification Research Program, which I thought was extremely interesting because it's 1990. Mm-hmm. The Cold War is sort of ending then, and we're off verifying, nuclear weapons and biodefense and all sorts of other stuff at that time. And you write this paper, thinking about, okay, these technologies are going to be coming along soon. We got to think about treaties and other issues associated with laser weapons. Talk a little bit about why you wrote this paper and what was going on in 1990.
Well, there were other authors. I was one of the authors. It was a group that was put together. I'm trying to remember if it was an initiative started by the American Physical Society or another professional group.
Yep.
I don't think it was APS. I think it was a different group that said, this is, remember, 1990 was still the Star Wars era.
Right.
The Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, so SDIO, which was stood up in 1984. Okay, that's when the office officially opened. I think it was in 82 or 83. Reagan gave a speech who said, I want to make it possible to defend against ballistic missiles. Okay? And the directed energy world at that time thought, oh, this is it. We're going to have laser beams and particle beams. We're going to shoot down ballistic missiles. We're going to defend the country against nuclear weapons. So there was a lot of excitement in that community and a lot of activity, a lot of money being spent by this new organization, SDIO, in inflation-adjusted dollars for 3 years. They were spending more than we spend today per year. They inherited a lot of programs. So there were some other organizations of scientists that were concerned that, of a directed energy arms race. Okay, what if we and the Soviets both have these kind of weapons, and could this then destabilize what at that time was nuclear deterrence? Okay, what if the Soviets think we can shoot down all their ballistic missiles? That's going to or the other concern was that these weapons, ground-based versions and space-based versions of potential directed energy weapons, could be used to attack satellites. That we could be attacking Soviet satellites. Soviets could be attacking American satellites. So a group was invited to think about this problem, and could we, if there was a treaty that was to control or ban or restrict the development of those kind of weapons, particularly the anti-satellite version of these direct energy weapons, how would you monitor it? How would you know that the Soviets aren't secretly building some remote place a big laser weapon? Okay. So that's why that paper, as I said, had some other co-authors whose names I regret I don't remember. I have to really dig through my files to find a copy of that one. It must exist somewhere. Because did you manage to find a copy on the internet somewhere, or just see the
Yeah,
title?
it's in your Google Scholar, but let me
Well,
I'll link to it. I'll
title's
link to it.
The question is, can you actually find the publication? I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, terrific. I'll have to go and see what I wrote.
Yeah.
It's 30 years ago. But that was why that was written. We schemed up this group of us schemed up several ways that one might be able to monitor without being intrusive, whether a suspected site actually had a direct energy weapon, whether somebody was testing it, okay? Whether actually shooting a laser beam or some other kind of beam of energy out into the air, up into the sky, without demanding that you go inside and you look inside. So that was the point of that paper. I have to say, I think that I don't want to encourage too many people to read that paper, because in retrospect, I think that the way we discussed doing it was not in fact going to be physically feasible. I think it depended on some technology advancements that turned out not to happen. So, but in any case, the Soviet Union dissolved and turned into a confederation, and most of the states broke away from Russia stood alone, and then they opened up, and a lot of those places that America suspected the Soviets laboratories were working on directed energy, we got to visit. We actually got to walk through the labs, and they showed us what they had. So, and they came to visit the U.S., and I was working at Livermore at this time, and we showed them what we had.
Got it.
Shortly after that paper got written in 1990.
Yeah, actually, it's actually
I
here
almost
in
forgot
the
about that. That was
yeah,
a long
no. I just found it interesting that it was in the middle of all, as you're, working on the early days of the technology. And yeah, no, you're the primary author, and it's here in the United States Department of Energy database, Office of Scientific and Technical Information. So yeah, you can access it with a couple clicks. So yeah, no, it's still there. Cool. No, okay, no, I appreciate going into that, Tom. So yeah, I mean, let's one other place I wanted to go before we get to sort of the DARPA era was this interesting, because you talk about LADAR and sort of what you were doing there, and a lot, a lot of the work in terms of sensing and information technologies. And then in 2014, Professional Society for Optics and Photonics Technology, you write this piece on something that you call the future dynamic world model as it pertains to, I guess, these technologies and sort of situational awareness of everything. And again, here you talk about all sorts of, I'll throw out a couple of these, basin-wide high Arctic acoustic networks and synthetic aperture radar and terahertz compressive imaging with metamaterial spatial light modulators and all sorts of other cool sounding things. Talk about what you meant by a dynamic world model in the context of directed energy technologies.
That's an interesting topic to bring up. What I was suggesting in that, and that was a conference presentation, is that, and this is now a decade ago, I mean, already there was so much information about what people were doing all around the world that was available through the internet. Even then, 10 years ago, I was conjecturing that you could combine, and with the exponential growth of digital computing power, you could combine this information to have digitally a model of everything going on in the world, what everybody was doing to everybody else. Okay. You could track anybody, anywhere in the world and see where they are, what they're doing. You would, you could look at, no country could hide what they were doing, because with all the sensing, both directly, like from space, or everybody running around with their cell phone cameras and so on, you would see the information would be available, and you could, in principle, put it together and figure out. You could ask any question about any part of the world of what's going on there right now, and boom, it would be there. You would see it all. And of course, it's 10 years later now, and our sensing, the world's suite of sensors is much more robust, and there's way more satellites looking down from space. You've got Elon Musk's Starlink, with digital voice and data traffic all over the world, thousands of satellites, and 1,000 more are going to be up soon. And of course, again, everybody's got their cell phone with their exquisite cameras filming anything that interests them. They're filming it, and it's streaming in, and it's going into the cloud. And with artificial intelligence, you could now do a much better job of integrating all that information, of pulling together all the bits and pieces and noticing connections between things that were not obvious to people immediately. It becomes an Orwellian sort of a vision. You can imagine this sort of supermind watching everybody in the world. In fact, I think there were even something like that in some of the movies in the 2010s. Seems to me one of the maybe one of the Batman movies, or one of these movies, had this sort of super mind that was watching everybody all the time, and he had to destroy it because it was becoming a world dictator. But you can imagine this Orwellian vision where with AI you put together all this information and you watch everybody all the time. You see somebody planning, somebody committing a crime, somebody planning to commit a crime, somebody talking about, whispering about something they did that was a crime, or that somebody somewhere else thinks is a crime. So I think that there's certainly the technological possibility to create this dynamic world model, to see everything happening all the time and understand connections between things. And it has a good side, but it also has a dark side.
Sure.
What are you going to do with that information? Okay. I think there's much more. When I presented this talk, there was objections from the audience. What do you mean? I don't think it's possible, and it's too hard to understand the connections and so on. And then somebody asked me, well, does DARPA have a program to do that, to put all this together? And I said, as far as I know, it does not. But in the back of my mind, there was an attempt to create a DARPA program a decade earlier. In the early 2000s, I was an advisor, a CETA contractor, an advisor to DARPA on their new programs. And there was an office in DARPA that was trying to create a program called Total Information Awareness, TIA. Google this one and a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I've heard of this one.
And this was the whole idea. They were going to be tracking everything on the internet to try to find terrorists or people planning, planning to commit terrorism. When this came out publicly, DARPA was trying to stand up this kind of program. It came under a lot of criticism, and it was shut down. Okay? The people who were involved with trying to set it up were quietly told to go away. Don't work here anymore. Don't try to start anything like this, here ever again. So 10 years later, I'm talking about, hey, we're now 10 years more advanced on all the sensing, and the internet's has more traffic going on, and somebody could put together a model like this. And it wouldn't just be people; it would also be physical systems. You could understand what's happening with the oceans and climate and resources, agriculture, forestry, energy, so on. You could track, what crops are everywhere, and what fertilizers are being used, and what pollutants are getting into the rivers and so on. So you could track sort of the ecological situation of the Earth in real time everywhere. There's enough sensors out there. You wouldn't have to create a new agency to do this. You just have to start looking at all that information and pulling all the information together. So maybe I was ahead of my time in pointing that out, but a lot of people now worry about this sort of combination of publicly available information. And a lot more people today are concerned about the privacy aspect. They now realize that, every time you click on something on the internet, it gets recorded by somebody, and probably there's some data broker, maybe not attaching your name to that, but your IP address is attached to it. And they're selling that to advertisers, and they're selling that to other people. I don't know about you, but but every day I get dozens of junk emails and spam phone calls and junk text messages trying to sell me stuff or sucker me into clicking on some link. People I never heard of, sites I've never been to before, but clearly they're getting that information about my IP address from one of these data brokers. And they managed to figure out my name because it comes to me, my name is in my email address. So they don't just get an IP address, they manage to track down my name from that. So it is scary. I don't know about you, but I have multiple layers of identity fraud protection and internet protection on everything I do.
No, it's they shockingly know quite a bit about me, and whatever, I Google something yesterday, and all of a sudden they're trying to sell me something related to that today. But
news stories that several million, I think the number was 11 million personnel records of government employees got stolen by the Chinese. This happened about a decade ago. I'm one of those 11 million because I got an email from the government saying, yes, we checked, and your information was downloaded and sent to somebody in China.
Oh, well.
Okay? So, but there were millions of people that happened to. So
amazing. Yeah, definitely. Again, as you were just mentioning, clearly there's a recurring theme here, Thomas, with your career that you're clearly thinking quite ahead of the times, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, obviously, per the space company, yeah. I mean, but whatever, these things happen. But no, clearly,
I'm glad that there's finally successful radar space companies.
Yeah, exactly.
American ones. I mean,
this is called what's this called? This is called future frontier thinking, whatever. But no, it's no. Anyway, it's impressive. Let's let's segue over to DARPA for a minute, because again, we profiled a lot of these folks, mainly on the bio side, the last couple of years. You had this incredible portfolio. You oversaw things like this Astral program, all signal tactical real-time analyzer. There was this other really cool one I saw on there. It's the Warden program, waveform agile radio frequency directed energy, which I don't know.
No, it wasn't mine. That's somebody else's.
Okay. Okay. So I apologize. It sounded kind of cool in the sense, it
is a cool program. Yeah,
Okay, I apologize for that. I'll give you credit for it anyway, because you know so damn much. But and then there was an interesting article near the sort of the end of your time at DARPA where you talk about how industry and these technologies, we're demonstrating them at somewhere between 50 and 150 kilowatts. We want to get up to 300 kilowatt lasers, and ultimately, we want to start, we want to get to the stage where we can shoot down cruise missiles and not just drones. And you were predicting maybe by 2024, this was a few years prior, we'll be at 500 kilowatts. Can you walk us through a little bit of where we are in 2024? Because, we talked to the folks at Lawrence Livermore and in the ignition facility. Okay, there's megawatt stuff going on there, but that's for fusion energy. Had some chat with Dave Stout over at Booz Allen on what it takes to knock a drone out of the air. And he was joking with me, when these things are on the aircraft carrier or the battleship or whatever they may be, you can't use it for everything. I was like, I'll use it for everything. I'll laser everything that comes my way. But anyway, talk a little bit about sort of per these energy profiles, sort of where we are nowadays and in 2024.
Yeah, I had the opportunity. This camera has fallen off the top of the screen here. Because I was the first person to have that position, principal director for directed energy in OSD, which was, and that's the first time the Department of Defense had a single person looking over what all the labs and all the services were doing. I was able to focus in and push some things that give us new opportunity to do new things. I got to give a little bit of history here. Back when I was first doing directed energy, that focus was on the strategic defense. We're going to shoot down ballistic missiles.
Right.
It was in the 70s and 80s. In 1987, the American Physical Society published a report. They convened together a committee of eminent physicists, some Nobel laureates, but other very well-known academic and national lab physicists. And they put out a report in 1987, which went through all the directed energy ideas for how to shoot down ballistic missiles and shoot down nuclear warheads and so on. And paraphrasing the conclusion of this report, it basically was the technology to actually do that in an effective way, a viable, effective way, was 2 or 3 orders of magnitude beyond anything that we knew in the 1980s. And we had no idea, how to bridge that factor of 100 or factor of 1,000 capability. I mean, we couldn't even lay out a development program that would get there. We didn't even know what developments would be needed and for how many decades or centuries it would take. It might never be possible, right, for that mission. And that kind of took the air out of the directed energy world for shooting down ballistic missiles. That's why when we field it's a limited defense against ballistic missiles, it's kinetic interceptors. It's not laser beams in space.
Right.
By the time I came in 2018, even much before that, the focus people had finally, in the directed energy world, had finally accepted that 1987 conclusion. They didn't necessarily accept it in 1987, but gradually they realized, hey, we can't deny this. It's way, way harder than we thought it was to do that ballistic missile thing. So they focused on what can we do that's tactically useful against targets that are softer, that move slower, that are at shorter range, where we have more time and we have help from other sensors and maybe we're integrating with other systems. So that was the focus of things, certainly after 2000 and into the 2010s. So by the time I came into OSD in that position again, the focus was on an entirely different kind of level of power. Instead of megawatts in gigantic, ground-based lasers or space lasers, it was tens of kilowatts, maybe with pumped by electricity, by electrically pumped devices, pumped by laser diodes or other energy sources, to shoot at things that might be 5 or 10 kilometers away, like a drone or a cruise missile. One of the first problems that I tried to highlight was the issue of the threat of these what we call them drones today. We call them UAVs then, unmanned air vehicles, and now unmanned air systems. There are various types, everything from the tiny little drones with the little 4 propellers up to much, much bigger stuff. Like the US has the Predator UAV with sensors on it. We have something higher altitude called the Global Hawk with sensors on it. And then there are the armed ones that we read about all the time being used by both Ukrainians and Russians in that war between Russia and Ukraine. Those are the threat that those present, both because they can be armed, but also even if they're unarmed, they can carry sensors that can pinpoint targets that you can then vector something else onto. The capability of that is growing exponentially. They're inexpensive. They're easy to make. I mean, in Ukraine, people are making them in garages and warehouses, and they're buying commercial parts and they're assembling, thousands a month and using them. And the same thing going on in Russia. I sort of liken it to the early 2000s, this threat called IEDs, improvised explosive devices. Came on very fast, and people learned that, hey, with a cell phone and the warhead from a mortar shell, you can bury this thing and make a bomb in the street and blow people up. And it's very easy to do, and it's cheap, and it's hard. How do you protect against this? How do you find that the thing is buried under the road before you drive over it? How do you protect yourself? This became a real problem in Iraq and in the Middle East in the early 2000s. Well, now 20 years later, the problem is these UASs. Fortunately, they are okay. And so why is that such a problem? Well, they only cost a few thousand or maybe $10,000, $20,000 for the more capable ones a piece. These have been, when these get launched against, for example, our ships in the Gulf of Yemen, we shoot them down with a U.S. Navy Standard missile, which costs about $2 million each. $2 million defense against a $10,000 threat. Even a rich country like us can't keep that up forever. Okay. And as I said, people can make these, adversaries can make these threatening drones in large numbers really quickly. People worry about swarms of these things.
Right.
Hundreds of them coming in at a single target. And we don't have hundreds of missiles we can launch to knock them down. One of the least expensive, I mentioned this U.S. Navy Standard missile. It's a very expensive missile. It's designed, it was really intended to shoot down enemy aircraft, jets that might cost $100 million a piece. $2 million missile versus $100 million jet. Okay, that's a good cost exchange. It was never conceived that it would be used to knock down $10,000 lethal drones.
Right.
So there are cheaper ways, kinetic weapons, to knock them down, but they're still way more expensive than the drones. They're $100,000, $200,000 a piece. The Israelis fielded their thing called the Iron Dome, which they used to shoot down mortar shells, artillery shells, and these Katyusha rockets, which are unguided, kind of dumb rockets. But the Iron Dome, a single round of that is, again, tens of thousands of dollars. It costs way more than the cheap Katyusha rocket. So even the Israelis have now looked at something they call the Iron Beam, which would be a laser weapon at the tens of kilowatts power level that could shoot down these inexpensive drone-like or unmanned air system threats. Okay? The U.S. Army has 4 of these 50 kilowatt class laser weapons that they're sending. I've read in the press, they're sending them to the Middle East. They're integrated into a Stryker armored vehicles, so they're mobile, and they're meant for mobile air defense. And we're going to see how well they work in a real threat environment. People worry about dust and sandstorms in the Middle East. How well are you going to be able to track and shoot your laser beams through the dust when you're driving down the road? Good question. We'll see when we get that experience. But we and other countries, and many countries have built laser weapons in small numbers, but for experimental or early prototype purposes. At this 10s to 50-ish kilowatt, 60 kilowatt level, We have one weapon like that on a Navy ship. It's called Helios. It's on the USS Preble. We have four. The Army has four of these in the field. There are some smaller, lower power systems at various bases around the world where people were experimenting with it. There also are some high power microwave devices that can be used to interfere with the electronics and interfere with the communications of those drone or small UAS vehicles and make them fall out of the sky, basically.
Right.
So we have the technology to do that today, and I've been encouraging people, and we're now starting to hear echoes of this coming out from the military services, that we really need to expand rapidly the number of these systems specifically to focus on this drone threat, because we already have enough power, we already have good enough tracking stuff and fire control software and so on to deal with, to be at least one of the cost-effective ways to deal with that threat. And that's today. What we don't have is a lot of those systems in the field. We have the technology. We don't have the will yet to spend the money to buy a lot of those and rapidly put them into the hand, give them to the Army and the Marines and the Navy and so on. One thing, and people ask me about, well, could industry respond? Could American industry build these things fast enough? We see that industry is struggling to build enough missiles and ammunition to supply Ukraine, to refill our stocks. My answer to that is industry responds to market demand, market signals. If you are the CEO of an aerospace company that builds weapons, and the DoD comes to you and says, I want to buy, 500,000 artillery shells this year, and I want to buy one laser weapon. Okay. Well, where are you going to invest your capital? Okay. You're going to use it, and that now, if they come to that same aerospace industry and say, I want to buy one laser weapon per month, every month for the next 3 years, okay, or one a week. I want to buy one a week for the next 3 years. So I want to get 150 or 200 of these things in the field in the next couple of years. Well, that's a pretty good market signal, because each of those systems is a multi-million-dollar sale. Okay? So now they're going to invest some capital to buy the machinery and gear up to produce at scale. And people ask, well, where are the skilled people going to come from to assemble this stuff? Because you can't build at scale when it's all done by Ph.D. engineers.
Right.
Right now, when they build one a year, two a year, it's a bunch of Ph.D. engineers put it together. But if the demand signal is there to do this at scale, they have the technicians. Instead of building the kinetic legacy systems, they'll train some and retrain or provide additional training to them to put together these directed energy sensors and systems. And by the way, the directed energy stuff has other than just being able to shoot down a drone, it comes with some other bonuses that the military has already found very useful. In particular, all the directed energy weapons, whether they're lasers or microwaves and whatever platform they're on, whether they're on a truck or on a ship or whatever they're on, they come with the weapon, as part of the weapon, an exquisite set of sensors. Optical, infrared, passive, RF tracking, radar tracking and location, exquisite set of sensors. They found this when we put the first laser weapon that was put in the field was called the Laude, and it was put on a ship in 2015 called the Ponce.
Yep.
And it wasn't a very capable laser weapon as a weapon. I mean, it could punch a hole in a little Zodiac rubber boat or shoot down a drone at very short range. But it had an exquisite set of sensors, and optical and the infrared wavebands. And they use those sensors every day on the ship. I don't think they use the laser in anger, in combat, maybe at all. But they use the sensors every day because it greatly improved their
Sure.
situational awareness of what was around them. And it will happen as we put these direct energy devices in the field. I predict that commanders will be using them every day to look at, hey, there's something out there. What is that? Is that a threat? Or let's look at it with those sensors. Oh, no, it's not a threat. We can ignore that. But they're going to use that every day. And they'll use it to identify the threats that they might want to shoot down with a gun or with a cheap missile. Okay. If it gets close enough, then maybe they'll use the laser or the microwave beam to shoot that thing down. So we could do that today. The next step will be, what's the next level of the harder targets? The ones that are farther away and move faster and that are bigger. That's the cruise missile threat, I think.
Right.
Attacking ships and attacking bases on the land. Those targets can move from just slightly below the speed of sound up to Mach 2, Mach 2.5. So you got to engage them farther away. You don't have as much time, so you need more power. Definitely need more power. And you also need an even better sensor suite to find them farther away and track them and identify them. So that's going to be, I think, the next level of capability. But first, I want to see, and I'm now hearing great interest by the Army and the Navy to see a big expansion to go after the drones, because the directed energy weapon, once you buy it, once you have acquired it and trained people to use it, the recurring cost, the cost per shot should be very low. It's not a $3 million missile or a $200,000 missile.
Right.
It's, a few dollars worth of diesel fuel to run the generator. And then you've got to have some logistical, you've got to have some spare parts, and you've got to have some training, maintenance expense. But it's not, you have all of those expenses for the kinetic weapons, plus you have the $2 million per missile.
Right.
So that's where I think we are today. We have the capability, the technical capability. What is lacking? So now you can ask the question, well, it works so good. How come we don't have the demand signal? Why doesn't it get the budget, resources to buy one per week? Why just one per year? There's still a confidence gap. The military, the confidence level is low that it's really gonna work in a combat situation. Okay. What do you need to be useful in that military situation? And I speak this as a technologist. I've never served in the field. I've never been an officer or a grunt, an airman, a soldier, a sailor. For things to work in the field and people who have those to be confident in them, they have to be available when you need them, meaning it doesn't take a couple of days to get it up and running. You flip the switch, and in a minute or so, everything's warmed up and all the sensors work and everything's ready to go. Okay. Secondly, it's got to be reliable, meaning mean time between failures has to be long. You don't want something that's going to break down every few days.
Sure.
It's got to keep working. Okay? And then third, it's got to be maintainable in the field, meaning if it does break down, the sailors on the ship or the technicians or mechanics on the Army post or the airbase can fix it in the field quickly. Okay. Most of the stuff that we have today doesn't meet any of those three criteria. It's not necessarily available at the flick of a switch, although it's getting better. It's getting quicker. It's not necessarily reliable. A lot of times these things break in the field. They break after a few days for various reasons, partly because there's a lot of commercial parts in there that aren't ruggedized, but we're getting better. The stuff's getting better. And they're not maintainable in the field, meaning when it does break, you have to send a crew of Ph.D. engineers out from the contractor to figure out what the problem is and then fix it. Okay. That's been a problem with a bunch of things that we have deployed, that they'll work for a little while, but they'll break down, and then you got to wait till the ship comes back into port, or the vehicle comes back to its depot, and then call up the contractor and try to, get the scientists and engineers on the phone to try to figure out what's wrong. And then it's some spare part that nobody has. You have to wait weeks to get that. It's not, that's not something you would have confidence in a combat situation. So we need to overcome those problems in order for the people who would stand up and demand, I want more of these. I want them in the field right now to actually get them in the field. But I think the drone, just like when the IED problem came up, we had a huge demand signal for how do we find these, or how do we jam them and prevent them from exploding. And the money became available to trial lots of things until we found some things that did work in the field and were adequate enough. Okay? And I'm hopeful that that will be the case now with this threat from the low cost, from swarms of cheap but potent kinetic weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to give such a long-winded answer.
No, it's really interesting, and I being a kid that grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, I was always worried about that. I don't know if you watched the Pink Panther movies. I was a big Peter Sellers fan, but the lunatic Dreyfus, created a directed energy weapon that got rid of the UN building. So we don't have to worry about that anytime soon.
No, we don't have those. We don't have those. We're not going to have those in a few years. There is still the power levels and technical capability will advance.
Sure.
I hate to try to make prophecies and say, well, by such and such year we're going to be shooting down cruise missiles, and so many years after that we're going to be shooting down hypersonic missiles. And I don't know. We could do better, and we're going to do better as fast as we can do better.
Sure.
The money is available. We see a path to get to those things.
Sure.
The Star Wars or the Star Trek thing where the phaser beam goes out and the Klingon ship blows up. We don't know how to do that. I mean, that was the point of that 1987 report. We don't know how to do that. We don't even know what technology could do that. We have no idea how to create that technology, how long it's going to take. But we can certainly do the drones today if we were to overcome this availability, reliability, maintainability issues, which were the case of every new weapon system. Sure. When you think about it, availability, reliability, maintainability are the first airplanes in World War I. The biplanes that had cloth, stretched over balsa wood for wings. Okay, they weren't very available or reliable or maintainable in the field either. They got better real fast under the pressure of combat. Right. Maybe half a decade from now, we will see in the field reasonable direct energy weapons to counter the cruise missile threat, which is the next very substantial threat to come along. Because you might not have, because there are adversaries building hundreds and thousands of cruise missiles. Right? Now the drones are being built in numbers of tens to hundreds of thousands per year, because they're much cheaper.
Right.
But the cruise missile threat's going to be the next one. Someday, maybe, we'll be able to do this ballistic missile defense with directed energy. I'm not sure that it would compare. This is another question that has to be answered. So how does it compare to alternatives? Does it work better than kinetic alternatives or other alternatives? Is it cheaper for the whole system? Everything you need to do it, the sensors, the energy source, the command and control, and comm links and all that. When you develop all of that and have to maintain all of that, is it cost effective compared to some other method of defense? Okay. We don't know, because we don't know how to do those things today. So we don't know the answer to those questions. So I tried, when I came into the job in 2018, I was not a rah-rah advocate for let's put directed energy, you do everything with directed energy. Remember, I hadn't been working on it very much for 25 years when I came in. So I had a lot of I had a skeptical point of view. So, well, how well does it really work? Where's your evidence? Okay, and we created some new programs to create more evidence of how
Right.
well. And we created the program to increase the power levels. You know, we now have these 300 kilowatt lasers. There are 3 of them that are electrically driven, much more compact than the old stuff we had 20 or 30 years ago. Several contractors are trying to go on to the 500 kilowatt to 1,000 kilowatt level of power in the next few years. We created this program. We looked at what we had and said it's not enough. There's gaps in our knowledge, and let's try to fill the gaps. And I continue to be a show me kind of guy. What's the evidence? What do you really need to do the mission? Do you really know how to do that? You think you do? Well, show me. What's your evidence? I'll give you an example. Everybody's probably, you could go out on YouTube and find videos of lasers burning holes in pieces of metal. Okay, in a few seconds. In fact, hang on, I'm going to show you one. I have one of those pieces of metal. Ah, here it is. Okay.
There it is.
A souvenir from my visit to a contractor. See?
Nice.
That's a piece of steel. Okay, about 1/4 inch thick. Hole burned through it in a second or two. Great. Okay. So what? Okay. You've probably seen these pictures, and you can see more of them. You know, Apple TV has a series on called Masters of the Air about the B-17 bombers in World War II. Take a look at all the holes in those airplanes, the ones that made it back to
right.
bomb run. There's more holes than there is fuselage. Okay?
Right.
And burning a hole through something doesn't necessarily destroy it. Okay.
Sure.
You gotta burn the hole in exactly the right place, because behind that hole is some very critical part that as soon as you burn through the steel plate and make the hole, that part is dead. Whether it's the guidance or it's the GPS receiver or whatever. But if you burn the hole in the wrong place, nothing happens. You just burn a hole. Okay. When people say, "Well, we know how to burn holes in the skin of what might make a hypersonic missile," I said, "Okay, so what?" So you burn a hole. Prove to me that actually destroys the thing. Okay? And on and on. Okay? So we put in place those kind of programs, and they continued after I left, and they're continuing now. That's what I hope that was one of my positive contributions to doing that job, to put in place things that'll fill these gaps in our knowledge. It's not enough to do this. There's a lot more you have to do to overcome this confidence and doubt issue, lack of confidence by military commanders, with justifiable lack of confidence. You know that kinetic weapons make what we call this flaming wreckage. When you shoot down something with a missile, your target blows up, falls apart. Flaming pieces come out of the sky. Burning a hole like this, a little hole in the skin of something, doesn't make necessarily flaming wreckage.
Sure.
So people have to develop confidence that this is actually going to be useful. So.
Well, you definitely laid the groundwork for the continued exploration and growth as we scale these systems. So nice.
And there's a lot more to do. And there's a lot more to do.
Sure. There's a lot more to do everywhere. But from where it started, and again, it's really impressive, and how you've guided this throughout the decades time. I want to ask you one. I mean, actually, we've been talking a lot about shooting down drones and cruise missiles and things like that. One other thing I just wanted to ask you about while we have you today, and I do really appreciate your time. I realize I'm taking a lot of it, but I have to ask about recently This was a presentation you gave, actually, was in the Journal Proceedings of Directed Energy Professional Society, entitled High Energy Laser Active Imaging of Deep Space.
Oh,
Um,
I love this question. This
yeah,
is one of the favorite things to talk about.
yeah. Well, I take a little time because I'd love to. Well, there's actually a couple parts to this. One, so deep space is everything, I guess, beyond the moon. So, love to hear about what you're looking at or you want to look at, because clearly, these things move fast and you can go far throughout the cosmos. And then I just, I'm not going to bring it up. If you want to talk about it, if not, that's cool. But, just a couple of days ago, the Department of Defense's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office came out with a report, saying there was no UFOs visiting us or any extraterrestrials anywhere. But love to have your thoughts on, clearly you're going to, these technologies allow us to see and communicate further than ever before. I don't know what's going on right now with SETI research or anything like that, but if there's any other cool applications beyond sort of mapping the near cosmos, love to hear about that as well.
Well, first on the imaging, well, for me, deep space really it meant everything above low Earth orbit,
Mhm.
geosynchronous orbit, but then out as far as the moon and ultimately beyond that. Whenever there's an asteroid that comes,
Yep.
in from deep, far away from the sun, it comes in closer to the Earth. You'll see images published on the internet or maybe published in magazines, images of it. Okay, you wonder how do they get that image? Well, they get
Right.
that image by a process called synthetic aperture radar. It's
Okay.
actually a radar image. It's not an optical image. You can't from an optical system. All you're going to see at these distances of those asteroids, millions of miles away, it's going to be an unresolved little dot. Okay, but with this other technology called synthetic aperture radar, you can create a much sharper, higher resolution image. And the radar people have been developing this for many decades, okay? And have developed the technology, and a lot of it is comes from the digital processing of the data, the radar data you collect, to make these exquisite images. There's the NASA has a big radar out in Arizona, Goldstone, Arizona, that takes these images. There's another radar up in Massachusetts called Haystack that's used by astronomers to make images like this. So it turns out you can make a laser radar,
Okay.
and you can use a similar technology to make these kind of images. Okay? You can do synthetic aperture laser radar imaging. And in fact, DARPA had a program that did this from airplanes looking at the ground. Okay? And I was one of the technical advisors of helped get that program started. I was not a program manager at that time. I was a technical advisor to DARPA.
Okay.
And such images were actually made by shining laser beams from aircraft at the ground, and they made images that were sharper than you would get by just looking through the same size telescope from that airplane. Okay? And I realized that you could turn this around. You could sit on the ground and look up.
Yeah.
Okay? Satellites very in geosynchronous orbit or even much farther away. And you could, if you did it the right way, you could make a synthetic aperture laser radar. So now it's actively shining your laser radar beam on that satellite and looking at the reflections that come back, and then digitally processing this and getting this high resolution image. You can, it's simply a matter of how much power do you have for your laser radar or RF radar, and how big an aperture do you have? How big a radar dish, if it's RF, or how big a telescope you
Sure.
have for your laser. But you could get any sharpness of image you want at any range you want if you have enough power and enough aperture. Okay. Now, that sounds easy to say. In fact, there are some other constraints You need a very, very good local oscillator, very, very stable, a laser reference. It's very, very stable. If it's an RF reference, it's an RF radar, RF oscillator, very, very stable. The farther you have to go out to send the signal and wait for the thing to return to come back, the more stability you need in that reference sensor. And there are other issues. I don't want to minimize the technological difficulty. But the reason why people use this synthetic aperture technique is you can get any sharpness of resolution you want, in any range you want.
Mm-hmm.
You have enough power and you have enough. Now, it turns out if you want to do this, if you want to have, sharpness, if you want to make an image of something out beyond, geosynchronous orbit, something that's halfway to the moon or more, at a sharpness 1 inch. Imagine that, 1 inch. Even the biggest telescope on the ground, James Webb telescope at those distances, a big 6-meter telescope that NASA put up, couldn't get that kind of sharpness that far away, 200,000 kilometers. But if you could get that with the synthetic aperture laser radar, if you used one of these weapon level powers of laser today, 50 or 100 or 3 or 200 or 300,000 watts, any one of the big telescopes on the ground that exist today, or that you could, if you don't want to use, the astronomers won't loan you one of theirs, you can build your own. The point is we have the technical capability to do this, to sit on the ground and get these very sharp images, so sharp that now you can see every little thing on the body of the space object. You can see if it's carrying little daughter satellites it's going to throw off, or you could see if it's got size of its sensor apertures and its comm antennas and so on and so forth. Or if it's your own and it breaks down, you can look at it and see, can you diagnose, did it get hit by a piece of space debris? What else is, what's the malfunction, and try to diagnose it. I realized that when I went through this power and aperture calculation, you can't do this with 100 watts. Okay, you need tens of thousands of watts of laser power to get out to those distances and get that sharpness of an image. But we have tens of thousands of watts. We have hundreds of thousands of watts now in very, very good beam quality lasers, and we have the big enough apertures. There was a DARPA program to work on this, DARPA-funded program called Longview, and I was one of the proposers of this when I worked at Northrop Grumman. And we worked on, particularly making the very stable, I said you need a very stable oscillator. Well, we demonstrated in the laboratory a very stable oscillator. And then you need digital processing to correct out any other errors. And some, what I only describe as mathematical geniuses on radar processing at Northrop Grumman wrote new code, new algorithms, and showed you could do this. You could do the digital processing. DARPA, in its wisdom, decided, oh, you've proven to us that this is easier than we thought. So it's not hard enough for DARPA anymore. They terminated the program. But I continue to go around to people and tell them, hey, if you want to know do you want to image things on the surface of the moon to, 20 inches, 15 inches sharpness? That's pretty sharp for something on the surface of the moon. See what it is. You could do that. We have lasers big enough and apertures today big enough to do that. Right? It's not trivial. It's not. I'm not saying this is something you could slap together in a few weeks, but all the technology does exist to do that. There's a lot of interest in putting things out in orbit of the moon, both for military and for NASA space exploration purposes. Other countries are going to do that. I think we are getting concerned about if other countries put stuff out there, what really is it? They say it's for space exploration. Is that what it's really for? Does it have other capabilities? there's a place between the Earth and the Moon called the L1 point, where the Moon's gravity and Earth's gravity are sort of in balance, and you can sort of hover around that L1 point. It's quasi-stationary. You can sort of hang around that spot indefinitely without using a lot of propellant. If some country puts something out there, how do we find out what it is?
Sure.
Okay, right now, the only way we could do that is we have to go out there ourselves with some kind of imaging sensor on a satellite and get up close enough to get a good look. That's kind of expensive to do that, and take a lot of propellant and take a lot of time. So I continue to tell people, hey, there's a non-weapon use for these laser sources.
Yep.
And we could do it today. It's just a matter of having, again, deciding we want to do it, and it will take some money. So.
Sure.
Now, on your other question, I don't know what star system the UFOs are coming from. I don't know that they're out there. Okay, literally, I've never attended a DoD briefing, on this new look at things, and I've seen on the videos of the YouTube these infrared sensors on Navy jets seem to be tracking something. The pilots say they're following something. I've seen the videos. I don't know what it is. I do know that sensors can create. There can be sort of ghost images that look real in sensors that aren't really looking at something. Okay? There's nothing really there. It's created by internal reflections and things going on internally in the sensor that nobody thought to did enough design analysis to realize might happen in certain special situations. So that doesn't mean that's what the pilots saw or the sensor saw. I don't know. Okay. As a physicist, I have to tell you, I don't know any practical way to exceed the speed of light. Okay, that Einstein taught us that's a limiting speed in our universe, and nobody's come up with a plausible way to do that, to have any physical object exceed that. Yes, I know there are wormholes that can go from here to the other side of the universe, through that. Nobody knows how to make one. Nobody knows how to get through one without being crushed. So if little green men are getting here, I don't know how they're getting here. I don't know why they would find us so interesting, frankly. If they could travel here from another star system, why bother? This is the real boondocks. Okay, if they could do that, why bother to stop here?
Why do they always crash in our desert? They mastered intergalactic travel, suspended animation.
Yeah,
they can't just land.
and they crash out in the middle of Nevada or New Mexico.
Exactly. How come they never crash in Angola or somebody?
Every time they want to land and abduct somebody, it's always out in the middle of nowhere. It's some guy.
Exactly.
Somebody. Why do you pick? At least that science fiction movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, made some sense. It lands right on the ellipse outside the White House. Okay, that would make some sense. But landing out in the middle of nowhere, okay, and picking up whoever's wandering around at night at 3 a.m. I don't know. It doesn't. It's hard to think it is plausible.
Right. What's coming up for 2024 for Tom Karr?
For me, I mean, what do I do?
Yeah, at conferences, talks you're going to be giving to the public-facing stuff that we should know about.
On March 22nd, myself and a colleague of mine, James Treves, we've been invited to give a talk here in Washington, D.C. On the sort of state of the directed energy weapons and what are they good for, who's doing what. There's an organization in Washington called PSW Science. Originally was founded as the Philosophical Society of Washington. And what they do is have speakers come in and talk about scientific and academic subjects of interest to them. So they invited us. So we're giving that talk, conference in, I have to look on my calendar to get the name right. Yeah, the Military Sensing Symposia, of which I am one of the members of the program committee, has its 2024 conference. It's going to be, let's see, what's the venue? It's going to be in Tucson, Arizona. I'll be there for at least, I'm not presenting anything, but I'll be there for a few days. There's a laser radar conference coming up later in the year. I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember exactly what the dates are. I'm also on the program committee for the and again, not planning to present, but will be there. I'm one of the people selecting people to give presentations. That conference happens every year, the SPIE, and there's a whole, and there'll be many, many speakers. It'll go on for several days. Between, I'm taking a long vacation to Italy.
Nice.
So in between, I've taken a vacation. I have one grandson, and another grandson's is expected in April, so I'll have a second grandson. So looking forward to my youngest son is going to get married. We think it's going to be in October of this year, so that'll be another milestone. And in the meantime, I mean, I enjoy my consulting work part-time, averaging a few hours a week. I like to go sailing. The sailing season is going to open up again here in Chesapeake Bay, in a few weeks, once we get to April. I like to do sporting clays, shooting at the clay targets with a shotgun. About average ability. Okay, I'm not too dangerous, but I break plenty of clays, and have a whole bunch of friends here who I see regularly, live around me. I'm just enjoying what I can do. Interactions like this, interactions like the PSW science, as they come up, right? And then occasionally I get called in to Air Force Science Advisory Board, Defense Science Board, because they have continuing studies that I participate in. So I stay in the know, sort of. I know at least the things that I have expertise in. I manage to stay in the know and keep about as busy as I want to be. I don't want to be working 60 hours a week anymore like I did.
But no, hey, I mean, yeah, you stay current, and you continue to educate the folks that are going to be continuing to apply and translate these technologies. So no, it's great stuff. Really, wishing you the best with all of it. Not just in your free time, but as you continue this important role for our national security. And so, no, really, really great stuff. Again, for everybody who is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or watching it on our YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Dr. Thomas Karr, former Assistant Director, Directed Energy, Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, Research and Engineering. Tom, it was just really exciting listening to you, going through your history. I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to do this. Obviously, thank you for everything you've been doing to keep us safe and developing these new technologies. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow and a safer tomorrow for all of us via what you've been up to. It's a really great story, and we're so excited to listen to it, and really wishing you the best with everything that you continue to do in and out of the space.
Well, thank you for inviting me to come on and do one of these podcasts. It's a great experience.
Having, really great having.